welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and it is a huge honor to welcome today's guest, Pashtana Durrani, the founder of LEARN Afghanistan, which is an innovative NGO that allows girls to gain an education in even the most remote environments where access to electricity and internet are not possible. Pashtana is a visiting fellow at the Wellesley Centers for Women. She's received numerous awards for her work in education and supporting girls and women, including being named an education champion by the Malala Fund, being chosen as a global youth representative for Amnesty International, and being among the BBC's 100 Influential Women list in 2021. I'm here with Pashtana to talk about her new book, Last to Eat, Last to Learn, which is a masterclass on instituting change in a sustainable manner. Where formal systems for education in Afghanistan have faltered, Pashtana harnessed passion, reason, and cultural knowledge to create a system that reached girls without educational prospects and inspired them to dream, which is just incredible to me. I can't even say how grateful I am to have you here joining me today, Pashtana. It's an honor to talk to you about all of the amazing work you've done.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for reading the book. Thank you so much. You put it so elegantly. I'm like, oh my God, that's my book. Yes, that is.
It is, and I meant to show it just because.
Oh my God! Oh my God! No,
you should see how many highlights are inside this thing. It is ridiculous, and
I
love about it too is your voice is so authentic in it. You're not out here acting as if you are some, high and mighty. Like, no, it's funny. It's there's a lot of sardonic, dry humor that it sat right inside my heart and made me laugh, and a lot of really important observations that I think Westerners are going to need as they look into these big concepts. I think for 20 years, Westerners just decided how things were going to go in Afghanistan, and there need to be Afghan thoughts and voices and really a lot of the thinking that helped you inspire LEARN. And maybe it's the flying chapeau, I hope I'm not mispronouncing, but maybe it's shoes flying at you that helps.
Oh yeah, no, it's flying chaplaks or it's even like hangers, many things.
Sure,
things.
Anything, just things,
anything that can hit you,
thrown at you that helps you to really, make those thoughts happen. But it's really a great book. I hope everyone reads it and thinks deeply about all of the things you talk about in here. So I want to get started. The first story that really touched me in this, you just for listeners who haven't had a chance to read yet, your father was the Khan, or the leader of your Pashtun tribe, the Barakzai tribe. And while you were growing up as a refugee in Pakistan, he set up an education system inside your home. And there's a story about another young girl named Pashtana, the other Pashtana, and it was a really moving story. And then it has a very sad end. And I wondered if you could kind of tell that story about your relationship with the other Pashtana, and then when she left the classroom and why.
So I was talking about it yesterday, and I was like, the one thing I was reflecting on was like, I still don't like doing that. Like, I wouldn't, like, if I was still back home and I had lived all this life, I would still not go to the second class. Like, once I'm done with my actual schooling, I would not go. Like, it's just too much mental pressure, a lot of expectations. But so growing up, like, my dad set up this school within our house, which was for all the people within the camp, but like the girls, especially the girls, because boys could actually take the bus and go to the city. So while this happened, and it's like a sudden occurrence, and you grow up seeing it and it becomes sort of normal. So there are like people, like, teachers have their favorites. So my aunt that I never mentioned is like, my aunt had a favorite. Her name was Bartania, which just, by the way, means Britain. So it's like a funny story behind it. So she was this blonde kid, colored eyes. So her family would call her Bartania, and then we would also call her Bartania, which is basically means a British woman, or like the country of Britain. So then there was another Pashtana that was my dad's favorite, and she used to study, and she had this like Barbie cut, like we used to call it the Barbie. She had these here and then all the back, and they were dark, and she was pretty, and she was like lighter in skin, and I hated her with all my heart, because I was like one of those tomboy kids with like bald cut, and I was not necessarily like, I literally had burned my shoulders because I used to wear this one frock or like this t-shirt, and I used to run around the house. So growing up, you are that kid, and then you're compared to this person who's like all graceful and elegant and all of that, and she does good in school. So it sort of does take you, especially when your father likes her and is like, every time she would do something, like for example, the polio vaccinations would come. So I would hate when I would be vaccinated, and I would like I would keep it in my mouth and go out and throw it away. Whereas she would just gulp it, and I'm like whatever, girl, whatever. Anyway, so and then my dad would like, if you don't do this, I'm gonna bring Pasana to this house, and you're gonna go to Pasana's house. And then I would be like, oh my god, that's not life I want. So I used to go to her house. My aunt used to give me stuff, and I used to drop it. But she was very good. She was way too good than I was in school. I'm gonna be honest. And we sort of grew up with that, 2, 3 years, I think, of my life until I was 9 or something. I knew Pasana was better than me, and I was like okay with it, made peace with it, but I was trying my hard just to compete with her. So, but I think at 9 or something around that age, I remember the one thing that happened was like Pasana didn't have her mom, so she was remarried. She's not remarried, but she was married off to a man who already had kids. And that was sort of my first time to see something happen so near house or within your house, where somebody who is your neighbor goes from coming to school every day to just becoming a name, that is told in stories, and everybody's horrified and mortified about, oh my god, what happened to that young girl. So I think with the story of Pashtana and Nur Bibi, it's like something personal because it almost touches home. Like, these both women I was exposed to, one took care of me and the other was my classmate and sort of friend-ish, and who would have been a sibling if my father had adopted her. But that's what happened with Parsana, and that sort of still makes me sad that she might have been somebody, like, I mean, she was brighter than me, so imagine. So yeah.
And it's something that, I see it all the time. These stories of young girls right now in Afghanistan being married off at such a young age.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine someone so close to you. Like, oh, that could happen to
Yeah. Oh
me.
yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, it
Definitely.
was never something that your family was looking at. And I love, your relationship with your dad in this is so special. I think he was just such, pushing for that education and showing you all of these things. And what was it like being the daughter of the Khan? Because you talk about this too. You actually had more freedom than your mother did
Yes.
because of tribal rules. Can you explain that a little bit and explain about how he brought you and kind of showed you the ropes?
So I remember when we were very young, there is this place which is like very far away. It's like a 4-hour drive or something. So because we lived in refugee camp in Sarkhab, and so we take this ride from here, and then this place is almost the border, the supposed border of Afghanistan with Pashtunkhwa or Pakistan. And what happens is, like, so all the people from his tribe who were in Afghanistan, they had come down. Like across the border, and they were sitting, and then all the people who were refugees also went with my dad, and among all of them, the only kid there was who was in the front seat sitting, and it was me.
Oh, wow.
And I remember, and like, this is like huge halls, and people are eating, and it's like one of those, I think it was around 700, 800 people who were there for, like, this big tribal jirga, which I think somebody was going to give some blood money to someone to resolve a big tribal feud. And these people are eating, and I'm just holding my dad, like his hand, and he's moving across the rooms, and he's talking to someone. And I vividly remember there was no electricity, and the guys eating, they look at me, they're like, hey, look at that. That's a kid. That's a young girl. She's wearing t-shirt and pant. And I was looking, and I was like, whatever. Like, I was being Miss Me. Like, you don't belong here. Like, I was wearing my pink purse and my. Do you remember those shoes, like with the glass shoes, the Cinderella slippers? I used to wear
Oh,
those,
yeah.
and then wear my tomboy shirt and pant, and then go with my dad. And then when they were talking, I was like, so what? Yes, I am a girl. So what? Like, I was being that. And the funny thing is, I have realized my dad didn't do anything. He didn't tell me, like, shush, or like, don't be disrespectful or something. Like, he just let me have it. So that's some one of the funny stories that my mom makes fun of me for that when she reminds me that I almost fought with someone in a jirga that was already resolving something else, because he called me like, oh, that's a young girl, what is she doing here? So I did have that sort of relationship with my dad throughout my life. um I remember when, like, I know it's going to sound very weird to the people in the West, but it's a funny thing, because so when I was like almost 20 or something, like, people would still tell my dad, oh, you should get married, you have only one son and you have very less kids, and you have this huge, like, estate and everything, and you have to handle, and you have all this stuff, who are you going to leave it to? You should have more sons. And then I remember my dad telling me, he was like, I tell people, I'm like, I'm not afraid of her mother, I'm afraid of her. I'm afraid of my daughter. That's why I don't want to get married. Like, of course, he didn't want to get married for other reasons, but he would make fun of me that he was afraid of me for not doing that. And that sort of defines the not only the relationship, but the dynamics. How he sort of not only respected that, but also respected the fact that how much it's going to impact us in the long run. So I appreciate that. But yeah, definitely, when I was growing up, rules completely were different from my mom, and it still are. Like, my mom still hides her face from four of my uncles who are like my older than my dad. She doesn't show her face. She doesn't. I mean, last year I graduated and I posted a picture of my mom and my dad. I got so much backlash from people. Like, people would go and take that picture and send it to my brother and stuff. So, like, I put my pictures all the time.
Mhm.
Nobody gives that backlash. So even, like, apart from my dad, the whole world treats you differently if you are in that position, and how you are somebody's wife, you're treated different way. So I think that sort of hurts me, and I still try and go and defend a lot of what I do, and how I see my mother in it, and how she has her own person, then rather than being somebody's wife or something. But, like, that's the whole story. Like, how defined her role was, like how limited and defined her role was. And I sort of do understand why it was, but I'm not pro it at all. Like, I would never let it be, because it's her own choice to be that person. So it was a different story. Like, I was allowed to do a lot of things. I was allowed to talk back, I was allowed to be mean, I was allowed to be all of that, because there was this learning trajectory. But everything was expected from my mom: to be graceful, to be elegant, to be patient, to be sacrificing, what is expected of women. And I sort of don't like the idea of women sacrificing everything. So yeah, it would definitely a different dynamic. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to listen to, because I know that that happens here in the West too, where every
Yeah.
generation women get a little bit more power, it seems. And I still love, I mean, your mom is a very strong character in this book. When she comes at you, it's like she does
Oh yeah,
not
yeah,
mince words. And so she does have this strength. She just
yeah.
can't use it in a social
Yes.
circumstance. And I loved that both of them really fostered that in you. And you are, I think if they hadn't done that, you probably could not have done the things that you did, because,
Oh
you know,
no.
you had to learn to express yourself and do all these things in that environment. And it was totally, it's incredible. Just the formation of your spirit from that young age. And one thing that you mentioned that cracks me up is the so-called border. Because that's almost
I
its
know.
own character in this book. The fact that, you know, what your sister coming across the border near the end, and it's once you know it, you can find your little ways, Khan Bibi's
Yeah.
path through, you know, this border region that is not entirely patrolled. And I know that there are so many refugees in Pakistan now, probably not as many as there were before the Pakistani government began to tell them to leave, but who probably have used those paths for
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like
generations.
it's a long border, and the funny thing is, people tend to think that it's like an ironclad border, or, like, one side, like, with the way it's politicized. Especially when I used to be in Kabul, if you were a refugee, returning refugee, you were seen a very different lens. You were seen as a spy or something else, or like even a 17-year-old would be like under that thing. But the funny thing is, people across that border, they have a faith of their own. I make fun of them for that. And it's like, when you call on them, they're going to be there across any side of the border. And I have one side, the person who they're going to be there for you. And that's one thing you can heavily rely on. And even with my sister that I just fought with before this call, by the way, we
I'm not
have our
surprised.
agreements.
I'm not
Not
surprised. Yeah.
embarrassing at all. We have our disagreements, but I think even like, when I was growing up, when I grew up, I think I was at that point where I understood my community and I respected that. And the reason was because I was more exposed to the male side of it, understood how they thought, but I also understood how to deal with them. My sister didn't, and she didn't care. She doesn't care. She still is like, trying to pursue fashion designing or whatsoever. So like she's a different person. But now that she has seen all of that, yesterday we were talking, she's like, when Learn started and I used to follow you, I used to be like, God, this girl is crazy and she's going to drive us all crazy. And I used to follow you with your stuff and I used to be so mad and I used to sleep in the car while you were training people. And now I look at you, I'm like, oh my God, like she knew, like it was like she had a vision, So even across the border now, she knows how to deal with people, how to talk to people, how to be respectful about it. Because the one mutual thing across that border is respect, is relying on each other, because no amount of money can get you that. No amount of connections can get you that. The only thing that gets you through that is if your father had a good name, if your grandfather had a good name, and how much of a good name are you keeping right now. So that's like the mutual thing you have in between. It's like, oh, you're from that family, you're from that family. Okay, cool, we're nice, we're gonna help each other, like it's sort of transactional, but in a very different way than the way it start here.
For sure. Oh, it's so different. And it's cool. You talk about that at various points in the book it's very enlightening to me, even as somebody I've been following Afghanistan since 2008, but I've never gotten just a very thorough idea of how those things work.
Yeah.
With examples, it's really neat to see how those dynamics work. And when you are meeting family members and the first thing you do is, or people who you think might be your family, and you kind of like grill them,
Oh,
and like
yeah,
here, if you
definitely.
did that with somebody, they'd be like, oh my gosh, what's
Yeah,
going on?
yeah. The first
But
thing is you
that's
have to humble each other. Like my mother is my humbling force in my life, and I do that to other people. We bully each other for fun. That's fun. We do it. It's a thing.
it's so different. It's crazy. And I love it. I love watching those dynamics, reading about those dynamics between you. It's really beautiful and unique. I wanted to get back to Learn. So before Learn started, you had the other Pashtana who kind of was in your head growing up. And still, I think, you talk about how you wish you could tell her that you studied for her. But there were some other girls that you met along the way who were really eager for education, and some of them tried to teach themselves, like a young girl named Dardana, and then two of your family members that you met in Kandahar who were not able to receive education because of your own family. And I wondered if you could share some of their stories and talk about how they inspired you to start Learn Afghanistan.
So Dardana definitely was a force behind all of this. I'm gonna be honest, like I still vividly think about how I had to spend that night. Like I didn't go to Kandahar straight. Like I had to spend that night for me to have this awakening of some sort. Before that, I was going to be a politician, a parliamentarian. I was going to run for a parliament, and then my dad wanted me to be a diplomat, which was like, I'm like, bro, what were you thinking? Not very much so, but the I think when I was in that place and on that day, I really want to reflect on that. I don't do it so much justice. Is when somebody comes into your house, which is supposedly your cousin, and you have never met them in person, but you have heard so much about her, and she comes in and she is excited to go and meet the ex-president of Afghanistan, and she's supposed to present. And then there is you, who is also from the same family, from the same background, from the same roots, and has been become an IDP, which is an internally displaced person. And but she's a refugee. So I'm a refugee who's coming back, and she's an IDP. So we are both not in our own ancestral land. We are moved to this new place. But I have more access to stuff than she does. And I think that was something that she maybe thought that I would understand it more than anyone else. Because when she came to me with that paper, which is still up on my Instagram, is she was not asking me. she just knew I'm going to reach places where I can ask people for this, you know? So I sort of knew that, okay, this might be something that I need to talk about, with my own family. So when Durdana came and she sat and we talked, and she shares this thing where she's like, oh, she's not going to school because there is no school, but she's learning at home. That sort of, that just changed the whole trajectory. Where in my head, I was like, oh, no matter what, you can go hungry, you can go homeless, but you study because there are schools everywhere, or even like people in your community are making efforts. But that was my dad making the effort, my aunt making the effort. There were other people who were doing individual efforts. Durdana was doing her own effort in her own way, So she was learning from her nephew who was coming Thursdays and Fridays. He used to take lessons. He used to go and she used to repeat those lessons until the next time he came. And that was like awfully inspiring, but also like so horrifying to know that it's a peaceful district. The world has given trillions of dollars to Afghanistan, and you still don't have a school for girls. And the funny thing is, when I went to Kabul and I talked to people, it was because it's under the supposed cultural norms. That's why they don't want to make a school. And I was like, if that's the cultural norm, then how come this girl is learning? It cannot get more cultural than that. Like, it cannot get more cultural than that. So that sort of takes this whole thing. So Durdana was definitely the start of it, and I promised her when I was leaving, because, and I don't talk about this because I think it's her story, and maybe someday she will talk about it. She had lost her mom to cancer, and she really wanted to become a doctor, and she wanted to be that person. I was like, I don't know how much I can do, but I'm going to make sure that you do something like with what you have. And the fact that you're learning at home is respect. It makes me earn you, like, I want to earn your respect to be around you. So I promised her that, and I leave and I go to Kandahar. And then, among all that privilege, among all that money, among all those riches and these amazing big mansions and houses, daughters of the martyrs of Afghanistan, people who were in army and police, their kids ended up with their families, and they were seen as a third or fourth tertiary sort of uh, thing that people would care about, because the first thing you care about is your own kids, your own family. So those girls were not going to school, but their brothers were going to school. And when I met these girls, their father had been shot in Arghandab 2 years ago or something, and he was shot by Taliban. And it was because her cousin was working with the in the past with the General Razik, who's very famous and everything. But her dad was not even involved. He was just a military person or a police person, and he still got shot because family relationship. And they were taken in by this grandfather and like the nephew who was like shot, who was the reason. So I talk to these girls, and they can speak good Hindi. They can talk in different languages, and it's amazing and fascinating how Afghans are good with different languages. Like, I have never met anyone who can speak 6 languages. I have met Afghans who can speak 6 languages. So I'm like, we should all be working at the UN or something. But anyways, so when I started talking to her, all I could see was this cousin of mine who is still in privilege, who's not in an IDP camp, who doesn't necessarily have the problem of money that I see, because it barely costs anything to send your daughter to school. But because she doesn't have her father to have that vision for her, or someone who's looking out for her. And most of all, it's the notion that if we had to invest in between and choose between the two, we would rather choose in a son than in the daughter. And that sort of ticked me. Because if you don't have a father, then you're going to be chosen by your relatives to be given that opportunity. So they were definitely the second person, because the minute they started talking in Hindi, and I was like, how do you guys know that? And they were like, oh, because we watch Hindi serial, and they could speak some Turkish too. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's where it made me realize, okay, you will pick up learning anywhere you can. It just has to be like, you just have to formalize it. And even then I was like, oh, whatever, like, I'm not going to be like educating people. I just promised that one Dardana, didn't even promise these girls to be those, to help them, because it's like they are already there. Maybe at some point their parents will realize, or their family will realize. um but then later on, the whole year trajectory ended up in this being, becoming my life's mission. Because I work with Durdana throughout the year. I get her into school. We take the whole family, we force the whole family into shifting to the city. They come to the city, they end up, Durdana ends up in a good school. And the funny thing is, she calls me after a week. She's like, I cannot do this. I don't want to go to school anymore. And I'm like, how dare you? I invested this whole thing. You cannot do this. Because I went to her brother and I gave him my word that if you do this, she's going to stick to it, and she's going to be someone. And that's like bad if you do that. So I was like, how dare you do that to me? And then I'm like mad, I'm crying, and I'm at my home, but I go and talk to her and I go to her school. The one thing I realized was she was not at fault. The schools were not equipped enough to have kids who were learning on their own and get them and make them sit in class or give them that training. Schools were the periods are 45 minutes. The teachers were already at capacity. And back in the day, I would blame the teachers and everything. Now that I reflect on it, I'm like, it was not even their fault because the whole district is like, the whole province is 17, 18 districts almost. And the whole province had only 17, 18 schools. Like, imagine if you divide one school per district, it's still not enough. And one district has like hundreds of villages. So for me, that was something I was sad about. And then that's where I realized, I was like, okay, this is not just her problem, this is everybody's problem. People like us who are coming from Maruf, Arghandab, whose fathers are shot, who are losing brothers, who are coming from these spaces where school is not available but we're willing to learn. We still have this huge gap of, oh, the government thinks that we still have cultural trash to go around. And I was like, what does that even make sense? Or the fact that the people who are here to help us are at full capacity, so we have to have a space that processes this whole thing, readies the students, and then puts them in public schooling. And that's how Learn came into being. And that's how I went to my dad and asked him for money and loan. And I make this joke all the time, but it's like funny because I never gave him the money back. I was like, I need $2,000. And he's like, okay, like, take it. And I was like, okay, but you don't have questions. He's like, you're going to do something useful with it. Like, I know you'll do something useful with it. And he gave me the money and I went to Kabul and I did the registration and everything. I put the site app. I went and like talked to the people. I took the softwares and I started talking to people in Spinboldak, and then I started talking to people in Daman. And then I didn't leave anything and any stone unturned until I was like, okay, these people have to be on board with me before I even claim to be this person. So this was the whole thing. But I definitely was Durdana, and then of course the girls in my own family, because in Islam we say, and in Perso also we say, like, charity starts at home. So if you don't realize and understand the flaws and problems in your own family, you cannot solve the world's problems. If you're And that's the joke that I make about Afghan male feminists, when they're like, oh, we're feminists, but then they don't show their women. They I don't know what their women are doing, but then they talk to other women and they're like, oh, we worry about your rights. And I'm like, do you? Like, you should be worried about your own female women's family members' rights. So that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the perfect segue to my next question, because I was going to ask you about the big things that impeded you, but I'd rather just say, your uncles. Your dad was your biggest advocate, but your uncles were always kvetching about, oh, there's too much money spent on
Oh yeah.
Pashtana's education. Oh,
I know.
and how interesting is that you need to have your father to be your advocate, and this whole system of trying to convince men, because you had to convince the local leaders that women's education was important. And I loved how you did this, because it took you some time. That I think, what did the first leader that you sat with tell you? He was like, why? Isn't that what he said?
Yeah,
Just why?
he was like, look around. He was like, and he rightfully so. He was like, look around, kid. We don't have electricity. We live in mud houses. We graze sheep for, like, that's like our thing. We have cattle. We don't even have water enough to cultivate the land. This is the most rugged and arid district, which was Daman. And he was like, we're under Taliban control. He was like, 10 kilometers from here, there's Taliban. The reason you're protected is because you're here and you're invited by me. He's like, look around. Why should I educate my daughters? And I was like, how long does it take you guys to send your women to hospitals when they're in labor? And he's like, 3 hours, because the road is not good enough. It's not even the proper road. And then there is no car. Like, there was one car among like 40 houses or something. It's like, oh, okay. So that, like, I understood where I could get him, and I knew where he was getting me. Because, good point. Why should I educate my daughter? I don't even have opportunity for my son right now. You know?
But it was such, your answer is perfect. It's the three-part answer of Islam says that women should be educated.
Yes.
An educated woman helps educate her children, which means
Yes.
that Afghan boys get an education from this. I mean, you came out with this beautiful answer, and as soon as you had that answer, it was like, all right, I'm on board. You
Yeah.
just needed to come up with the answer.
And
And it was
the funny thing is, I sort of am very I don't give up until people like a no is never no in my head, unless a part of the consensual part. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about negotiation. No, I'm talking about the consensual, the negotiations. No, where in negotiations. You have to give in something and then you have to expect something. And with this particular guy, he was not disrespectful. He made landi for me. Landi is like the dried meat and it's so good, and it's like only royalties fed that, only your family elders are fed that. So he made landi for me, and he was respectful, and he showed me around, and he took pictures, and he was there, so he was not against my existence as a woman, who's talking to him, not hiding her face, not even related to him, only had vague an idea of my dad, and he was not even from my tribe. He was Popol's, and and he was not from my district, so there was nothing that was binding him to respect me. The only thing that was because I was an Afghan woman, and he respected that. So for me, I was like, okay, we'll talk about it. I was like, okay. So he's like, Islam says that I should educate my daughters, but I'm already educating them on the Muslim side of this learning, or like the Islamic side of the learning. Why should I do anything else? And that's where it made me realize that they don't have a need for education. There is no need for education in the current setting because they're so off the grid. And even if it's that, I cannot give him just philosophical answers. It has to be something that's bigger. It has to be spiritual. Because we are extremely spiritual and faith people who follow faith. So it has to be something that is foundationed on faith, that has a cover of culture, because the culture has that. And then it should be built inside with the reality, which is the economy or the needs or the demands. So that's where I came. I was like, listen, Islam says that you have to learn from your mother's womb until you die. Islam also says that women and men have to pray. So if Islam is not discriminating against in the middle of the two genders for praying or for when they're learning, how are you discriminating? Why are you discriminating? And then the second thing is, I understand your sons might not even go to schools either. Second thing is, you have a need for doctors right now, and we don't, this, I know this, that the doctors are not going to come to you. But if I assign a doctor for the next 5 years to you, and you promise me to send your daughters to school, which is going to be in your place, in your space, once they're certified, they can become the midwife that you really don't have to worry about somebody coming from the city to be your, the person that is going to take care of your community. It's a very respectful job. And a lot of people are willing to, have their daughters be in that space. And then the last but not the least, in our Afghan history of the 3,000 ancient history, or 3,000 years ancient history, or the 300-year-old modern Afghanistan history, women have been at the forefront. And I told him, I was like, we're sitting in Daman where the ministers of Ahmad Shah, Baba are they that's where they are buried. So it's like we're in a place where Ahmad Shah Baba listened to his mother, Zarghana, who's I would say the first lady of Afghanistan in a way, because she was the mother, and she was like the mother of the founding father of Afghanistan. And I was like, when you look around the world, you can find more details on Zarghana than the father of Ahmad Shah Baba. I was like, imagine that. Like, this is your great great grandmother that I'm talking about, because tribally he was related to that more. I was like, this is our roots that we're talking about. And I was like, when British came and invaded us, it's not the men we remember, it's the women that we remember. Malalai, who fought the British. I was like, Aisha Durrani, the first educated queen, is known to be that. So it has to be something that's not alien to them. It has to be told to them that even 100 years ago, on this very holy land that you said, there were women who were controlling this land politically, economically, and socially. They were all educated. And you cannot do justice to their history by not educating your own daughters. You have to come up with all those things before you talk to someone.
Yeah. And you did it. I mean,
Oh
It's
yeah,
the
yeah.
most beautiful argument. I have it. It's one of my sections here that's got the post-it on it because it's just so, it's perfect. You did an excellent job of clearing that up. And one thing I glossed over and meant to ask you about though is you had another amazing opportunity on the table that your mother was really unthrilled that you didn't take. Can you talk a little bit about what that was and why learn was more important than taking that opportunity?
So my uncle, one of like my dad's cousins, he was in Germany and he kept on forcing my dad to like make me apply for all these colleges. So I got into other colleges in Germany and then I got into some in I think Belgium or someplace. But this was like a big deal because it was a Oxford preparatory program. It was like I would get into this preparatory program. If I do well, then I'm going to end up in like the Oxford school, like in on its own, and I could study politics and everything. And if anyone and everyone, you might not know where England is or Britain is or London is, but you know where Oxford is. If you're somebody who is studying, or has been around the world, or who's mostly like invested in politics, because all the political leaders of Asia have been to Oxford. So that was like sort of thing. And I was already in that prep program, and I could just apply for the visa and stuff and get out. And my mom was very much on board for me to get out of Afghanistan at that point because there were bomb blasts where I was on the side when those happened, and then there were attacks, and they were all circulating around me for some reason, or I was there at some point. So my mom was not very happy with what I was doing with my life, and she thought it's like a gap year project that she's gonna do. But when I declined that and took this up, I think my mom was not really happy. I not think she made sure that I know that she was not happy. But then at the same time, I think for me, learn was more than just like, oh, I'm gonna do this and like help people. I didn't have a savior complex. I still think that our communities need to take like dig themselves out of these graves that we were put in. And then most importantly for me, it was like, I'm educated enough to bring this solution to the table. So imagine if I'm bringing this, how many more people like me are out there and who are going to bring these solutions to here. So for me, learn became sort of like a calling on that end. And it was not because I wanted to save my community or I wanted to be famous. I was way too famous back then just for my like sarcasm and stupidity and being all this loud. And I would have very well been famous if I came from Oxford and I was like, running for parliament, or even like took over what my dad was doing. Like that was enough for my family to be a Nepo baby. So I could have done all of that. But this was something, and I'm going to be honest, nonprofits and NGOs are looked down on in our part of the world, or especially where I come from, because they're like, oh, these are like project people. They do their projects and then they move on with their lives. So they don't
Yeah.
look up to it. In the West, people look down on nonprofits because they don't make money. In Afghanistan, people look down on nonprofits because they're like, oh, these are project people. Like they don't really care about you if you're not the interested party for the donor. So for me, it was a hard choice, and sort of I had to make sure that my parents understand that it's what I'm choosing is going to be respected in our community, and most importantly, the fact that this is our community needing it, and we cannot wait for Save the Children. That some of the project people pitches us as potential people to be helped. I was like, you cannot expect them. And most importantly, when I was young, I used to go to English school. So my dad would force me to teach the girls whatever I learned in English in the second time in the school. So it's like, if you expected me to contribute, then I'm going to contribute in this way, and you have to be okay with it. And I was respected. I was not accepted by my mom at all, but when it started happening, and whatever happened. And then when my family used to meet people who talk about me, then my mom's like, if you would have gone to Oxford and done a PhD and come back, I would have not been this happy the way you are happy right now. So it changes, but it definitely was a hard first 2 years where my mom was not on board with it at all.
I'm sure. And yet you made it happen. And I have two comments about the things that we just talked about because you did have fame. You were writing op-eds that were putting you on the government's radar and the Taliban's radar.
Oh yeah.
There's a part in here where a Taliban, I'm sure that bomb that went off at the place where you were supposed to present that was intended for you. You had just chosen to give someone else the floor because they were the more respected, older individual, and you thought that your father would kill you if you didn't
I
let
was
him
like,
have the
how
floor
could you do
first.
that? I met this old lady. I don't agree with her politics, but I still kissed on her hand. I was like, if my dad was alive, he would kill me either. I didn't respect her enough. So I had to kiss her on the hand. So
Oh,
yeah,
the one.
those are
Yeah.
the norms. Those are the norms. You can't just run away from them just because you don't agree with them politically, you know?
Yeah. And so, yeah, you had that fame. Like, you could have done those things and you stuck with your guns on this. And it wasn't something that was, you know, intended to make you look good. It was really, it's such a pure, you want to bring this to
Yeah,
people. And the other thing I wanted to say is, when you were talking about schools, and here you talk about how the government would ask for money for a school. They would build the school, the Taliban would bomb it or otherwise destroy it, and then the government would say, well, hey, let's have more money for a school, like, let's, but nobody was getting educated in that environment, which
yeah,
was why Learn was so important, because these girls, with you ended up coming up with this system where there were tablets, because you always knew it's, tablets were the answer, but it's not going to be, this fancy
yeah.
tablet. It needed to be something. And this, was it a German company or a Danish company? I can't remember who
It
gave you the
was
original.
Rumi. It's Rumi. We still work with them. It's
Oh,
Rumi. It's a
Canadian.
Canadian app.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And they're solar charged, plastic, like very durable, and you preloaded them with stuff. So
yeah,
it's all there and anyone can use it to learn. And it's, it's the reason I brought up the schools is that it's something I used to write about all the time, when I was first learning about all of our efforts in Afghanistan. Is, you slap together this school, but you're not making an enduring, like, that school is going to fall apart.
yeah,
It's the people are the important part. And so Learn takes away, you don't need the school anymore. You don't need to worry about, is the Taliban going to do something to this school?
yeah.
It's at your home. What's the Taliban going to do about it?
What are they going to do? Yeah, exactly.
But I love that. And so I love the story too. And I'm hoping you can tell it about the 6-year-old girl who was one of the pilot users of the Learn
Yeah.
tablet, and what she told you, because it just warmed my heart and I love it.
So this is like my cousin Malali. She used to go with me to these schools, and she used to talk to these kids. And there's a picture of me and her in the back. So this girl that I was talking to, and this is the time where we're not so good on money. I'm still begging my dad for money, and he's giving me money, and my mom is not happy. But in my life, and I'm already at the American University of Afghanistan, which is already attacked back in the day, and I'm already like pissing off people in the government, and them are already labeled as a spy by them. Then by the Taliban, they don't like me or my dad or any or and even my family and tribe. So I'm in the middle of all of that, and we start our first pilot because of Rumi, and then my dad gives me some money, and we get the tablets. We pre-upload everything. We get everything ready. We go to the school. We make a partnership with them in Malajat, which is like almost the suburbs of Kandar, and we go there and we start talking to people. So we give them the training and we give them the tablets, and I talk to the students. And I think there is a picture of them, yeah, that's the picture that we had from the students from that year. So we do all of that, and then once I'm done with my spring semester, I go in May to just look up on everything. So I go to Kandar and I meet the students and everything. And once I sit with them and talk to them and everything happens, so before I do that, yeah, I talk to I get in, I sit in the office, and start talking to the principal, who vaguely knows my dad, and like who's friends with my cousin and everything. And me and my friends from the uni, they're also sitting there, so we're all volunteering for this project. Nobody's getting paid. One Mohib was getting paid like $35. I had to make fun of him for that. So it was all volunteer based. And then as I start, I'm talking to him, and he's like, oh, so I'm like, what is the progress? And I'm like worried. I'm like, he's gonna tell me, oh, it's not something that, like, we need more tablets, or you need to invest more, or something of that sort. And I'm like, so I'm a little anxious. And then he's like, you know what, there's this girl that you need to meet. The stories are so good that the girl has learned it by heart. Like, she could literally just animate the whole thing to you. And I'm looking at him, and I almost tear up, and I'm like, suck it up. Like, you cannot cry in front of him. And I'm like, thank you so much. I needed that. So then they bring in the girl, and the girl comes in and she tells me the whole story, and then she talks about how she wants to, like, paint, and she wants to become an artist. And I just sat there thinking to myself, I was like, maybe she won't remember me or what we did or even the story when she grows up. Maybe she'll remember everything about it, and she might, like, have, like, this might be her initiation, because growing up, like, the Lion King had such an impact on me. Like, I would see my family all in it, and I was like, uncles, my dad, everything happening, and I was like, then, the Simba, and I was like that was my life. Of course, I was the main character. My dad was Mufasa. But like, and I swear to God, one of my uncles do resemble Scar. So
Is it the one
anyway,
who took the con ship? Because no.
I know,
Oh.
it's so dramatic. I still make fun of all of this, but so this girl, when I was talking to her, was like, I remember people in my life who impacted me when I was young, and I used to tell my dad, I want to be like her, or I want to be like this person. And of course, I wanted to be my dad so badly that every person came in secondary. But I was talking to her, and then one of my friends reached out to me, and he was telling me, he's like, how his maternal aunt's daughter studied in the same school, and she would tell him that, oh, this girl comes to our school and she talks to us about, like, tablets, and she trains us. And it's like, and he was telling me, she says that I'm gonna be her when I grow up. And I was like, thank you, yes, please. So that's like sort of cute things that would happen across everything. And now that we reflect on it, I was talking to my cousin Malali the other day, and she used to go with me to these places, and she had posted this picture. She's like, oh, Pasana used to deal with the elders, and we would train the kids, and it was fun time. And I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, we were so naive, and rightfully so. It's such a good thing to have that. And this girl was just the right thing that we needed at that point. Like, it was almost 6 months into this training pilot, and I had taken so much money from my dad, and I didn't have any funding, and I was doing it all like on my own, and the people who were with me were not even getting paid for the day. So all of that sort of, it was such a good beginning. Like, when I reflect on it, I'm like, it could not have been more perfect than this.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I felt myself starting to tear up when I was reading it, especially
Mm.
how you cried in the office. I was like, "Oh my goodness." I can just imagine all of those things and finally feeling like, "Okay,
Yeah,
this can work. This can
yeah,
work." And it's more like, I love that you talked to, it's the Lion King, and you've fought for that the entire time, that has to stay, because learning isn't just about, memorizing a text. It's something speaking to you and making you feel a certain way. And to that end, you've named all your programs at Learn after Afghan heroines.
yeah,
And I love that, because those are things that here in the West, we don't know about Afghan women here. Like, we do not. And I think our view of Afghan women, and I've argued this a lot on the podcast, are these pictures we saw of the Taliban era, women
yeah,
in blue burqas, right?
yeah,
And that's what we think, because that's what we've seen. And you are harnessing these stories and showing these girls, this is who you come from. This
yeah,
is who you can be. And I think that is so much of what we tell ourselves we can be is what we become. And without having those examples, like, you don't have, the dreams don't have a place to start, you know?
because it's like, when I was young, I was in grade 3, and they used to talk about these famous scientists, and the only person in that book was Madame Curie. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God, like, there was a woman who won Nobel Prize, and she was so good at it, badass. And then I grew up, and then growing up, of course, I was already taught about my history, my women. So I never had that question that the world saw us different.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they knew how brave we were, how smart we were, how badass our women were, or like how amazing our history was. But the more I grew up, the more I studied the world and the world history. And then still we had so much then, where the countries were not even recognized, and we had women who were running literally provinces and states. And then got to know that, oh, we're barely seen beyond that blue burqa. As long as you see that as through that gaze, you're never going to accept the person, the Afghan woman that is behind it. And she's so powerful, she's so smart and intelligent. I wouldn't say resilient, because resilient does not do it justice, but she has been that way not because of this conflict, but because from the starting of her roots, from where she comes, from the mountains of Afghanistan, from the beautiful lands and everything that she owns and has, from the beautiful embroidery that she wears. And she's all that powerful with her feminine self. She doesn't have to become something else. She doesn't have to be man enough to do it. She's woman enough to be doing it. And she's an Afghan woman. So for me, those were important to be told, to show it to the world that you really need to reevaluate the way you look at Afghan women. You really need to reevaluate the victimhood of Afghan women. How do you place them in that? And how your politics has placed them in that. So it's very important for me even now, because someday when I have daughters or kids, I really need them to grow up in a world where Afghan women are seen very different from what I saw, like, from what I saw when I grew up, not when I was young. Young was a different thing. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's so, and you have to think about it. The Taliban, the reason they're trying to repress Afghan women is I think they do recognize just how strong Afghan women are. And they
Yeah.
know that if Afghan women had a voice right now, they would not be in power in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form, making the rules that they make, which is why they're so intimidated by the meetings that just happened that they refuse to attend and things like that. They know those things. And so
Yeah.
I'm
Oh my
glad
God.
that
They know.
you're,
They recognize it. I
yeah.
was on an Al Jazeera interview with this other journalist, and then so Shaheen was on it too, who's like a Taliban spokesman or something. And when I said you're doing this thing wrong, and he couldn't contradict me, he started yelling. Like that's the only thing he could do. It's still on the internet. He started yelling. He's like, you are making like you're doing propaganda. And I was like, okay, then prove me wrong. Prove me wrong that schools are open. Okay, tell me.
Yeah.
And so this sort of like and then like every time I'm on some TV news channel and anything, and when they cannot respond back to what I have to say, then they come up with their own sort of excuses. They start labeling you, and it's not uncommon, because that's what the Republic Times did too. When their men couldn't do anything else, they would do the same thing. They would label you, they would like harass you in different ways. But this time, it's a uniform policy, like a blanket policy for all. And that's what pissing me off, is like, it doesn't matter. I could have fought whatever back in the day was, because I constitutionally I had the right to be where I was as an Afghan woman. Today, I'm reduced to mere reproductive system, and I refuse to be that. I refuse to be acknowledged as that. So those are important things to understand and reflect on and understand the dynamics.
That was powerful.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank
And
you.
I see it and I agree. And that, yeah. Two things I want to ask, because I promised you we would be at an hour, and I'm seeing that we're coming close, and I don't want to take too much of your time because you have so much going on. But, in the book, you talk about being named a Khan in your tribe, which had never, to your knowledge, happened before. And I think you were 23 at the time. So here you are,
22. 22.
22,
Yeah.
22-year-old Khan of the Baraksite tribe, named that way by these local leaders after your uncle actually took the turban, right? And said he was the Khan, and the local leaders said no. I mean, one of them even cried and said, "You are him," like about
Yeah.
your father to you. I mean, it's so powerful. And that is incredible to me. It shows this progressiveness that we don't hear about in Afghanistan. How do you think we can harness that at a time when the Taliban are no longer in power? Because the Taliban will not remain forever.
See, this is why I still go back to Afghanistan under radar, and I still build my constituency, because I know there is an Afghanistan waiting across this dark time, and that Afghanistan is going to be willing to accept me the way I am. And my constituency is going to lift not me up. Maybe I'm not there, but another woman who's going to fill my shoes. Another girl, another person. I don't know who, but somebody. And that's the reason I still build my constituency, and that's the reason I believe in it. And I sometimes I'm sarcastic about it. I'm like, all these people who are like, who tell you we're the representatives of all these people. Okay, tell them, ask them if they can bring out like almost around 300 people outside for you today. Because I can. I'm not claiming it, because 300 women come out every day to learn, to study, to get educated. And almost 40 men protect them from for doing all of this, and from surveillance. Those 40 men are related to 40 families. And apart from this, people work on my lands. They still do. There are families who are still being employed by the farming lands. There are people who are still calling me and texting me and asking me for stuff, and it's not coming under learn. No, if floods are happening, if earthquakes are happening, or um, if somebody's son was in police and now they need help for money, they cannot come to me through learn. They come to me because they know whose daughter I am, what responsibility I have, and what my commitment to them is. And that's what I follow. And that's how you build constituency. And yes, it might seem very selfish when you say build constituency, but that's how you do it. You are there for them. And yes, I may not be there 100%. I may not be there for all the requests, but there are things that I do throughout the year that ensures that it's intact, and it's much more than this. And within the Barakzai, so within the Barakzai, it's funny, I don't know if you will even, like, people listening to this will get it, but you have to know all of these. So when we were young, we were all taught. I still have the Shajara and Nasab, which is like the family tree. So it's like Durrani, Barakzai, and then within Barakzai, it's Navraddin. Navraddin has Taruzai, and then Taruzai is like, it's gone into Drikhanzai, which is like the three Khans. And then Drikhanzai, the first son is like the Adokhel, which is my family. So you need to know all of that, and I still visit one of my uncles who is like the general for the place where we are from, Maruf, and he was teaching me last summer about like how 150 years ago this tribe was fighting against this tribe, and then we gave them, like, freedom and independence. So now I make fun of them when I'm talking to them. So it's sort of, you need to understand your history in order to do all of that. For me, Barakzai is a huge tribe. It's a huge tribe. It's all over Afghanistan and even some parts of Iran and even Persian-Khwa after the changes and everything. And within that, the Taruzai family is something that we have harnessed for the past, from what I can remember, for the past century. We have been there for them and they have been there for us. So it's not a one-way street. It's like, both of us have done things for each other. And when my grandfather was doing it, or when his father was doing it, things were different. People came to them for job opportunities. People came for them for land. People came to them to resolve their tribal issues. When my grandfather came into power, it was all the Soviets were fighting, so we have to become refugees, and who's going to lead us into becoming that? My grandfather did that. When they were refugees and they were like, oh, the UNHCR, UN is coming, and we don't have somebody who's going to represent us. My dad and my uncle sort of navigated that, and they became very famous in that. And then when it comes to me, I'm in very uncharted waters where the politics of it is messed up. I'm a woman. I don't have someone who could guide me, because with my dad, he had his uncles to guide him. With my grandfather, he had his uncles to guide him, because it comes after the passing of the father. With me, I'm getting I now get navigations from people within my tribe who are the elders, who supported my dad and now support me. But apart from that, I do my own effort. I do my own research. I meet people. I talk to people. I understand them. It's because I still get uncomfortable when I'm like being called that, because I don't know how to, like, I don't think I am my father. I can fill those shoes, but there are times where people call my mom and they're like, oh, we love your daughter. Can we talk to her? Can you please invite her when she's here? And there are people who would cross borders just to see me. These old women whose sons they had lost in war or something. And it's not because I live in the US or because I'm this. No. It's mostly because I'm my dad's daughter, but also because I remained committed to their cause when my dad passed away. Because when my dad passed away, people would call me. They were like, "You haven't become orphan. Our kaum, or our people, our tribe, have become orphan." So those are sort of important things to me. And I know there's a lot of criticism of the way I think and the way I believe and the way I was raised towards it, because people think if you're tribal, you're only going to care about your people. No. In Learn, we go throughout 34 provinces. My vision is by the end of 2025, we have 34 schools out of 34. We have 34 schools within 34 provinces. My goal is to ensure all girls get education. My goal is to ensure all ethnicities, tribe, I don't care, whatever your religion, tribe, color it is, you need to be in school. That is my goal. But I cannot shy away and run away from the fact that apart from Learn, I have this responsibility, and I cannot turn a blind eye on it. So I have to be there for, if somebody's son passes away, I have to call them and give them my condolences. I have to be there to share the happiness of their marriage. I have to be there if somebody needs help, money wise or something else. Those are things that are left to us in legacy, So it's hard to navigate. I'm criticized for it most of the time. I'm praised for it most of the time, and I'm loved for it within my community. And I'm opposed by other people within other side, like sects of Barakzais. But it's okay. It all comes with it. My dad had it too. So I'm not afraid of it. I'm committed to it. Yeah.
I think it's so important. And I'm hoping that other women, especially because it's almost like I hope that these two things play off on each other, that the girls that you're educating through LEARN can see, and that their parents can see, look at that. Look at this is happening. And she's doing a beautiful job and she's leading. And look, our daughter can lead too. You know what I mean? That's what I want to see, is that this is
That's
just
the
kind of
goal.
like, yeah, exactly. That
That's
it's
the goal. That's the
women
goal.
once again are in these positions of power, and not just hyphenated Afghans, because you do talk about that a lot in the book. And I want people to really pay attention to that. You know, Afghanistan has had so much flight over the last decades because of the conflict that's going on, and you have Afghans who've been raised in the West who might not be as comfortable in that tribal environment, and might not be as tied to the people who have stayed and endured. Not that leaving isn't enduring, it's just a new kind of normal that you're then
Yeah.
assimilating. And sure, maybe there are some things that those people can bring back that are great for Afghanistan, but they also need to understand, just like we failed to do for 20 years, the people we were working with. And so I can't say enough good things about what you're
Thank you.
doing and the hope that it gives me. And the last question I have for you is, listeners who are paying attention today, what can they do to help educate girls in today's Afghanistan?
I think the first thing anybody, I wouldn't say not only LEARN, but any organization that has currently given you proofs that they have people in Afghanistan and they are teaching girls, volunteer with them. We have so many volunteers that volunteer their time with us and teach girls English and computer skills and all of that. We have around 300 girls who are right now getting educated from grade 7 to grade 12. We had our first batch that just graduated from grade 12 with the transcripts. Yay. This Feb. So, people who are going to show you those, please volunteer with them. Your skills, your time is the most valuable thing you can give. Second thing is share about their work, share about our work. Any person who's doing, see, I cannot only alone save Afghanistan, and the goal is not to save Afghanistan, the goal is to build Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is right now not on fire, but it is being held hostage. So how do you build that? How do you recreate that? How do you access that? So it's important that people who are doing efforts, they're supported in all ways. Their stories are shared, they're given that recognition, they're given that spaces and resources that they need. And the same goes for LEARN, like share our work, donate to our work, talk about our work. If you have time, volunteer with us, but then do the same thing for everyone, because we might not be able to reach all people in Afghanistan, and that is something I have to make peace with. But there are people together, we can all reach Afghanistan. So do all of that. That's the most important thing anyone can do. Last thing that I would like to end the note on, which you talked about, is my goal is why 3,400 girls. There's a documentary called Daughters of Destiny. It's an Indian documentary on these girls. That is, these girls have to touch at least 100 lives within their own life. So these girls are chosen from these lower caste communities. They have to get studied, they become someone, and then they have to impact 100 lives within their lifetime. My goal is I'm going to ensure that we impact 100 girls per province. And if we divide that, even if we divide it, so per district, it becomes ends up into 3 to 4 leaders, women leaders. In next 10 years, the goal is that if you educate 100 girls to the full context of grade 12, even if 10% of them becomes political leaders, economical leaders, 20% becomes teachers, 30% becomes doctors, engineers, and 50% just stays there and do the most, like, median jobs, like becoming a assistant, or like, running business or something like that. You will still have 100 local genuine leaders who are going to be there, who understand this but also has access to that and can bring both. And within 10 years, each province has that. each province can harness that and look forward to it. And if we can do that, imagine if somebody else is doing that. Like, 3,400 more people are doing that. So the goal is not to just keep girls in school. The goal is to get them graduated, get them into good colleges, give them diplomas and transcripts, harness their leadership, make sure that they end up in places of decision making. And then in 50 years, we're still not crying about Afghanistan and conflict. We're celebrating our development. And it's not so bad because I saw other countries getting developed, like, the Middle East and everything. So why can't we do that? So that's the goal. That's the mission now.
I love it. I wish you so much success.
Oh, thank you.
It is that's the path to the future as far as I can
Yes.
see, building up all of that capacity, the economy, peace, because educated women are not going to let their children become terrorists.
Yeah.
It's all so important. Before we close today, I want to make my call as I always do. We usually end every episode with a letter from an Afghan because usually it's two Western voices talking, and that doesn't convey the experience of Afghans. So for any Afghan listeners, we always encourage you to share your stories, whether it's of the war years or life under the Taliban or during that short withdrawal period that was so chaotic. And you can send those stories if you want to do written stories, or even if you want to record something, you can send it to the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. And then just, Pashtana, thank you for everything you've done to help girls achieve education and just writing this book. I think it's going to be really valuable for people who are looking to make change in the future. So
Thank you so
thank
much.
you for doing
Thank
it.
you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It was my pleasure entirely. For all our listeners, thanks for sharing your time and supporting the people of Afghanistan. Tasha Kaur, and we hope to see you soon.
Oh, thank you.